here's the thing. Investing into commodity is something that is not my preference. I'm not a big commodity fan. But I do understand that commodities play a huge role in the investment space. Not just in the investment space, but in the global economy, basically. And the way the price of gold, oil, and all other natural resources move determine the stock market, determine our livelihood, determine the things we buy in the shop. Whether you're buying at ShopRite or buying at Woolworths, the price of commodities influence all of that. So I saw it fit that episode 2 of the Student Investor Podcast should cover this topic, because the more we understand the basic principles of investment and what influence investment, the more we'll understand the other topics that we'll cover during the first season of the Student Investor Podcast. So guys, without wasting any time, let's get into this episode. Welcome to the Student Investor Podcast with Ivan Sambo, the podcast that focuses on starting a conversation about money, investing, growing your career, and being a young person in South Africa. Our goal is to simplify the conversation so that we can all learn and grow as young people in South Africa. Hello, future millionaires and billionaires. I know you all drag talking about commodities. I know myself, I'm not a big fan of commodities. The price of gold, the price of crude oil, the price of silver, the price of weed, natural gas is something I really don't like talking about it. But it is important when we're going to speak about investments in general, because that sector of commodities influence hugely everything we do, from property to the tech field to everything in between, is influenced directly or indirectly by commodities. So when we're going to touch about any form of investment, let's lay it down. Let's have the basic principle. Let's have the basic foundation set up so that we have context to every other topic we will cover during the series. So today we are covering commodities, and I have given you guys reasons why I think commodities is important to cover on. Let me make a general example also, just to set the scene, right? This year we saw the war between Ukraine and Russia. With that war alone, the spark of it, because those two countries together controls around 10% of the global wheat and oil production. Those countries together control 20% of the world's natural gas. So those two countries determine the price of the principle of demand and supply. And with that war alone, we saw European natural gas price increasing by a record of almost 60%. We saw the price of oil increasing by almost 30% just because of those two nations. And with those commodities prices increasing, tech companies in the GSE, in the New York stock market, all over the world suffered. The price went down. I know there are other factors to this, but the Russia and Ukraine war was a huge impact. And it was not just because of those countries fighting, the two of them, but it was because of the commodities that these two countries control globally. With Russia, we know Russia was the largest supplier of natural gas and heat to Europe. And Europe is a global Western superpower. Let's be honest, if Europe is suffering, the world's going to see it. America's going to see it. Africa's going to see it. Australia's going to see it. And that's why the commodities are important to understand when you're going to enter the investment space, because they are going to impact your shares. Whether you have shares of Anglo America in South Africa or Impala Platinum in South Africa, whether you have shares of Tesla in America, shares of Microsoft in America, at the end of the day, commodities determine a huge role in those prices of those companies. So we need to understand them. So when we talk about commodities, what exactly are we talking about? So there are two types of commodities in general, right? What we know as hard commodities and soft commodities. When we talk about hard commodities, most of the time we're talking about those ones which are naturally mined. We are talking about gold, we are talking about platinum, we are talking about the typical natural what do you call this thing? Natural things which are mined, right? Which we find them under the earth, maybe still copper or whatever the case may be. Those are called hard commodities. Then we have soft commodities. When we talk about soft commodities, we talk most of the time agricultural commodities. That's when we talk about things such as weed, things such as, for example, what do you call this thing? Such as coffee, basically, guys, agricultural products. Let's put it like this: those are the commodities which are grown. They are not mined. They're not hard natural resources like, as I mentioned, gases and oil and gold. Those are called hard commodities, and soft commodities are the agricultural ones which are grown. So why is it important to invest into commodities, right? Majority of the time, commodities try to link themselves with inflation. I hope you get that right. So much of the time, people invest into commodities for two main reasons. The first reason, as I mentioned, is because much of the time commodities are linked with inflation, right? So for example, the inflation is low, the price of oil, the price of gold, the price of all natural resources may be low because inflation is low, right? Then let's say whatever it is happened, a market crash, whatever it is, inflation skyrockets for an increase by 20%. I know that's a rough estimate, but let's just play around with gas, right? Inflation increases by 20%. What happens that the price of those commodities as well increases roughly, or around the idea of also playing around with inflation. So they may as well also increase by 20%, meaning you bought them at a lower price and now you are 20% high in profit. So at that time when inflation is at the highest, majority of people invest in commodities, sell at that time, and they lock in that 20% profit because of inflation. So that's why people invest in commodities most of the time. And the second reason that people invest into commodities, and this reason is linked to the first reason I gave, is because of they want to diversify their portfolio. Let's make an example, right? Here you are, you're Ivan Sambo, you're in the JSE, you bought Impala Platinum, you bought ShopRite, you bought Pick n Pay, you have all those shares that you bought in the Johannesburg stock market. Cool, nice, right? You have those stocks. Then in the sideline, you're diversifying your portfolio by being in the commodity space. So when inflation hits the general market and people are not going to buy clothes at ShopRite, or food at ShopRite, or people are not going to Mr. Price to buy clothes because there's high inflation, things are expensive, your portfolio is protected, but the shares of those companies will go down, but your portfolio is protected because you have commodities. And at that time, when inflation is high, the price of commodities is high, meaning your portfolio in general is not making a loss. You can sell those commodities at that time and get yourself a little bit of some profits and go buy those companies who are now low, then they're now down, their prices are down because of inflation. You buy them at a discount. When inflation goes down, you have more shares of those specific companies and you make a good profit. So that's basically is the main reason why people invest into commodities, so that they can be able to diversify and protect their portfolio in general. And that's a strategy many people use international. And this is a strategy I'm seeing less and less of South Africans using, if that makes sense. In South Africa, we don't think about commodities in that way. But as I said, this podcast is all about sparking a conversation. So that's the main reason why people look into commodities. Those are the two main reasons. I know there may be other reasons. Some people hedge against commodities. There's a lot of other technicals, things why people invest into commodities. Some people even trade commodities. I don't want to touch on those complex issues. Those are not for this podcast. This podcast is all about simplicity. Now, let's get into the disadvantages of commodities. So commodities are one of the most volatile investments you can make for yourself. That space does not play, right? It is influenced by many other things, right? The reason that is volatile in that manner is because the price of commodities is heavily influenced by trends in global demand and supply, and also technology. Technology also hugely influence the price of commodities. But at the same time, geopolitical issues are the biggest influence influencers of commodity price, right? South Africa can wake up tomorrow, the ANC government, and set up a new bill and create a new bill that changes how we deal with platinum in South Africa. South Africa is the biggest platinum producer in the world, or America, or whatever the case may be, or the Arabic countries can come together and form whatever things we're seeing right now to regulate the price of oil in the way that favors them, and that will determine and influence the price of that commodity. So commodity most of the time is so volatile because it is influenced by hugely politics, number one, and politicians wake up and change their mind based on who's bribing them the highest or who can give them the biggest vote. It's not based on what is economically reasonable. And the second thing, that the price of commodities as well is hugely influenced by demand and supply. As I said, if the demand is very low, you know what will happen. I don't want to explain the law of demand and supply, but we see that hugely happening throughout the world, and also technological advancements, right? If a particular natural commodity is needed for a specific technology field, the second that field does not need that commodity, the commodity is no longer gonna be high, you're gonna be low, because no one needs it anymore. So why will people be buying it? That means there's no demand for it, and the supply will go down and the price will go down, right? So it's hugely influenced by those fields. So when you're going to invest into commodities, you need to look into that as well. And the other thing as well, when it comes to commodities, that I feel is hugely what do you call this word, it's the whole English. One of the things as well when it comes to commodities people don't look at is the easy access to it, right? Because it's very heavy, it's very hard to get access to commodities. It means most of the majority of the time it can be hard to manage them in your portfolio and be able to track them accordingly in your portfolio. So that's the other thing as well. We must look into it when it comes to commodities. So now let's talk about how can you invest into commodities when you're in South Africa, right? There are ways that you can invest into commodities. There are actually 5 ways that you can invest into commodities. But let's touch about the one who are realistic first, that we can actually do ourselves. And the first one is the indirect ways to invest into commodities. The first one is through companies, that's mining companies that mine those resources. For example, Anglo Gold or Anglo Platinum or Impala Platinum, right? You can invest your money through easy equity, through the Shift app by Standard Bank or FNB, whatever broker you're using, to buy shares of companies that are in the mining space, because you want to diversify your commodity percentage in your portfolio, the allocation of commodities. That's the indirect way, number one. Buying companies that deal with mining or producing those resources. It can be even an agricultural company. You can buy shares of a company that specifically deal with agriculture for the sake of just having commodities in your portfolio. That's the first way, the indirect way. The second indirect way is through what is called index funds, right? There are some index funds that are available out there that you can buy into, and those index funds are hugely in the, what do you call this thing, in the commodity space. For example, I know there's a Standard & Poor index fund that also deals with commodities. It's an index fund that's available as well. There's some few ones that are there internationally. I forgot their names right now. I don't know why I'm forgetting their names right now, but there's some few ones that are hugely. I know the Rega International Commodity Fund as well, a commodity index, is also available. So index funds as well are a huge way that you can invest into commodities as well, because they specify deal with them. One can be created just to deal with industrial material, one can be created to hugely deal with energy, whatever the case may be. That's the second indirect way. The third indirect way that you can invest into commodities for yourself is through an exchange traded fund, ETF, or an exchange traded note. Both of those two things are available in your Centrix app. For those who are using Centrix apps, they're available in your Easy Equity app. I'm not sure about the Centrix, I'm not sure about the Shifts app by Standard Bank, but I know FNB has it as well. You can invest through a traded fund that specifically is designed to deal with commodities. So for those who don't know, when we talk about exchange trade funds. Basically, what we're talking about a basket of shares or a basket of indexes that tracks, or a basket of fund that is invested in a specific industry or a specific group of companies or a specific in the industry in general, right? It can be tech, it can be commodities here. For example, you can have an ETF that tracks and trade in financial institution that owns an underlying portfolio that is commodities in general. Or we can have the same thing as well with exchange trade notes, which basically are debt securities that are listed in the joint stock markets. And we can have one that's heavily deals with commodities indexes, and you can buy shares of those ETFs or those ETNs and invest into them, and they are currently available international. I'm not sure if we have one in South Africa that's heavily, I know we have ETFs that are heavily in the commodity space in South Africa. I don't know about ETNs that are in South Africa, that are South African based, that are in the commodity space. It means you have to look international, even if you're using Easy Equity or using FNB or you're using whatever platform that you're using. So that's the third indirect way. The first indirect way that we can talk about investing into commodity space, obviously, is the physical investment of buying that direct commodity and keeping it in you. If you want to invest into gold, you buy a gold bar for yourself, you buy a silver bar for yourself, you put it in a safe in your home, so when this time the value of those things up, you go sell it and you get your profit. That's the simple direct way you can have it. And other direct way, which I'm fully not educated about, let me not touch it, so I'm not fully educated to it, I don't want to talk about it. So those basically is how commodities work in general. I hope I have been able to touch in every single point that you want to talk about. So those are how basically commodities work, and I want us to understand commodities, so that when we go deep into other episodes in this podcast, we are fully aware about the foundation of commodities and how they influence all our other sectors that we're investing into. For example, Tesla creates electrical cars, and those electrical cars need batteries, and those batteries are made of a rare natural material that's found in Africa and some part of Asia. And if that material that Tesla is using is a commodity, and if those countries wake up and say no more giving this commodities of our natural resources to Tesla prices will plummet. They will go down like no one's business. The same way with Apple, you buy shares of iPhone. Don't think the price of iPhone is only determined by people buying iPhones or not. Remember, the batteries and chips that iPhone is using, they are mined in Africa. They are natural resources, they are commodities, and the price of those commodities influence iPhone indirect and direct. So the price of iPhone is determined by commodities as well. So that's the other things we have to think about, guys. So as always, guys, this is the Student Investor Podcast with Ivan Sambo. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you love it, and I hope you will share it with a friend. So let's share this podcast, guys. Let's make it trend. Let's make it feel more open and have many people talking about it and many people listening to it, because we're all about that education. We're all about ensuring we enrich each other in this field of talking about money. As always, guys, thank you so much for listening. Until the next episode. I hope the conversation was inspiring and will lead you to take action. As always, I love hearing your thoughts. So what was your takeaway point from the conversation? Let me know on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. I am Ivan Sambo in all those platforms. Tag me, follow me there, and let's continue the conversation. As always, I am Ivan Sambo, your student investor, and thank you so much for listening.